Hello and welcome to this first video on this channel, Equine Hair by Sabina. As the title indicates, I'm going to be going over today basic hair care for the horse, though most of this applies for human hair as well. We'll cover everything from chemicals to avoid and products that I recommend, to styling tips, healthy hair care tips, washing tips, everything like that. I hope you enjoy. This first section here, chemicals to avoid, I've split up the chemicals based on what products you might find them in. So sulfates are almost always going to be found in shampoos, and they're definitely not going to be found in any sort of conditioners or deep conditioners, though you might find them occasionally, obviously, in your 2-in-1s and things like that. These are the family of chemicals responsible for cleaning the hair, so the actual stripping process, lifting all the grime and dirt and debris out of the hair, as well as cleaning the scalp in terms of sebum, which I'm not going to go too in depth, but sebum is something that's naturally produced by the scalp as kind of a lubricant to coat the hair, but with too infrequent of a wash, or even if you just naturally have oily hair, which horses can have too, there's a lot of sebum buildup, so that's why sulfates are in shampoos oftentimes. You don't necessarily need to avoid them completely, and especially with horses, the budget often does not allow for that, because the products that completely avoid sulfates are the ones that are often most expensive. But if you are going to use a sulfate shampoo, you want to make sure to use it infrequently and use it properly, which is what we will talk about later. The next chemical I wanted to talk about was drying alcohols, which is kind of a family in its own. These are found both in shampoos and conditioners, which is why I put a picture of both a shampoo and a conditioner. And depending on which product they're in, they work slightly differently, but essentially they are there to dry out the hair. While I don't quite know why companies put them in the first place, I do know that it is essentially just needlessly drying out the hair. So if you can avoid them, you should. There are cases where drying alcohols are very beneficial in products, mostly in things like show sheen and heat protectants. Both of these have alcohol in them to sort of speed up the drying process, either with applying a heat source or not. So that's why show sheen has alcohol in it, and that's why you shouldn't avoid show sheen just because of that. But in things like shampoo and conditioner, if you can avoid it, or as long as you do so properly, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Silicones and waxes are another family of chemicals I would recommend avoiding. Though they make the hair feel very strong and very healthy, they do this by essentially coating the hair in what would equate to plastic but is not actually plastic in order to close off the hair shaft completely. This makes it very easy to detangle, makes it feel very soft and strong, but is not offering anything in the ways of nutrition. So it's best to either avoid these products when you can, or at least deep condition every once in a while, which I will talk about later, to help retroactively negate some of these effects. Though I did just list a laundry list of chemicals to avoid, I would like to now point out some exceptions to this rule that I sort of alluded to earlier, one of which is with human hair, it's a lot more damaging to use the chemicals I mentioned before, mostly because humans tend to wash their hair a lot more often than they do their horse's hair. What I mean by this is the average span a person goes between hair washes is a few days, maybe daily in some cases, maybe weekly, depending on hair texture and everything like that. Whereas for horses in all over the industry, you see weekly washings being the most frequent thing, maybe bi-weekly, and then even sparser than that. So for the human who's washing their hair a lot more often, these chemicals are allowed to do a lot more damage than in the horse's hair. So that is something to keep in mind, as well as we'll talk about later. There are ways to properly and improperly use each of these products, which can sort of affect how damaging they can be. So I just wanted to keep that in mind because I don't want anyone watching this to sort of feel villainized or feel guilty for using these products. Especially as equestrians, we know how expensive everything can be. I'm not saying that you should go get the $50 bottle of shampoo because it has no sulfates. I'm just saying there are good ways to use these products, bad ways to use these products, and ways to help negate the effects of these products as much as possible. Here are the ingredients lists to 2 products, 1 shampoo and 1 conditioner. I just put these in so you could get a feel for the real life ingredients and what to look for. And while these are actually pretty tame in comparison to some products, you still see that they contain alcohols, various sulfates and dimethicones, but comparatively, they are still pretty decent products, and as we'll discuss later, when used correctly, there is nothing wrong with using products like these. Deep conditioning is something I wanted to touch on briefly because you'll see it all over in the equestrian world, be it at a show barn, a sales barn, a lesson barn, and it is a great cost-effective way of repairing and reversing some of the damages done by the chemicals I talked about earlier, so long as the deep conditioner does not contain some of those chemicals, especially those silicones and those waxes. This is a great tool that I would recommend any person, whether you own a horse, are showing a horse, or just projecting a horse, uses every few months or so to sort of help the hair, re-nourish the hair, and everything like that. Heat is something, just like for human hair, that we equestrians use to speed up the drying process or to style the hair. So for the Arabian circuit, you might see a lot of trainers will straighten their manes and maybe their tails before they go into a class just to ensure there are no kinks in the hair. You might also see heat applied to any form of hair before it's being braided up or put into a tail sock. This is just to make sure that it's not wet before it goes up. If you're going to be using heat like a blow dryer, just make sure it's not too direct. You don't want to let the blow dryer get too close. So you don't want to be able to smell the smoke and the steam coming off the hair. You don't want to be able to see any smoke, and you definitely don't want to be able to see the hair curling up and shriveling, because that is a clear sign that you're essentially frying the hair. There are many detanglers out there, and this is essentially personal preference as to what product you want to use. But something to keep in mind is the hair is strongest when it is dry. So I personally will always recommend that you detangle before you wash the hair. You can use products such as Show Sheen or similar detanglers if you need it. I wouldn't recommend too much of it if you can avoid it, because even though you are going to wash it out, you don't want to use so much and then promptly wash it out, which would just feel like a waste. So you want to be mindful of things like that. Always make sure to start from the bottom and work your way up the hair, be it the tail or the mane, because it will not only be practically impossible to work your way the opposite way from the top down, but it's also just kinder on the horse, it's easier on the hair itself, and it's just an easier time for everyone involved. Here are some of my product recommendations in terms of hair moisturizers and detanglers. Shea Moisture in general is a spectacular brand, but their detanglers are amazing, be it for human hair, especially if it's curly or textured, or horse hair, especially if it's curly. This is one of the best detanglers I've found for thick manes with a lot of curl and definition. Cowboy Magic is another great one. This is one that's a little bit more easily accessible. It's at pretty much any farm and home or tack store. A little bit goes a long way, which is very nice and very economically friendly. Show Sheen is very similar. You can dilute it quite easily. It's very effective. And then this pink hair moisturizer concentrate is something that you will see a lot in saddle seat barns, training barns, and show barns. I think it's great. The only issue, it does have lanolin in it, which essentially acts similar to a silicone where it will seal off the hair and not allow any other sort of nutrients in. This can be a good thing because you can put this on after cleaning the hair, and it's very nice for sort of sealing, and it also acts as a pretty nice heat protectant because it's sealing that hair in that good way. So if you were to, say, straighten an Arabian mane for the Western Pleasure class, this is something I'd recommend combing through a little bit beforehand, just so you can have a little bit of heat protectant, sort of like a buffer from the direct heat. After choosing the products you want to use, the one thing I'd recommend in the actual washing process is when shampooing, you want to make sure you're not explicitly trying to retangle the hair. Even if you did not detangle before starting the wash process, you don't want to so vigorously scrub the hair move it around and retangle it during the shampooing process. Because not only is this retangling the hair, making it a lot harder to detangle, but this violent sort of scrubbing motion is not good for the hair itself, especially on the ends, which are the most brittle parts of the hair. You want to focus your scrubbing on the what is considered the scalp. So if that's the tail, it'll be the tailbone. If that's the mane, it'll be the crest of the neck. But you don't want to retangle the hair like the left picture is doing, or like the right picture is sort of rubbing the hairs against each other at the ends of the hair. That is not recommended for the reasons I just went over. You want to sort of use your fingers and dig into the quote unquote scalp, the crest, the bone, whatever it is. But you don't want to flip the hair over itself and retangle it a bunch of times. As stated before, I would always recommend detangling your hair before you wash it. So finger picking is a great way to detangle hair. I personally prefer it over simply brushing, or at least doing this first and then brushing, because it's a lot less hair to deal with because you're taking such small chunks at a time, detangling those and sort of parting them on the side to work at the rest of it. But if you are going to detangle while the hair is wet, the best time to do so is during the conditioner process, because during this time, if you wanted to detangle the hair, be it the mane or the tail, lightly, you can. I would not recommend going about it in the way that you see in this picture, where it looks like she's just kind of combing from the top down. But detangling during the conditioning stage is all right as long as it's done gently. And then this rightmost picture is just in reference to making sure you rinse the hair very well. So you want to make sure there's no conditioner or shampoo left. You want to make sure to rinse, especially at the quote unquote scalps again. So making sure the tailbone is without any sort of suds or residue from the conditioner, making sure the mane is completely rinsed out, as well as the neck on both sides where the runoff has passed over. Body washing is something I wanted to touch on briefly, and essentially just say that as long as you're diluting the soap enough, you can choose any soap. A lot of show barns, training barns, schooling barns, whatever it is, will use something like Ivory, which is actually a dish soap, because it's got a little bit of a different chemical component. It's easier to rinse from the short hair on the body, as well as gets a little bit sudsier, so it can break down some of that buildup easier. But again, shampoo is shampoo. If you have only shampoo and conditioner and you need to wash a horse, obviously use the shampoo, don't use the conditioner. You want to avoid conditioning the body essentially in that way as much as you can. But whatever soap you choose to wash the body, just ensuring that it's a diluted version, so a bucket of soapy water rather than directly putting on soap, is enough to clean that body as you want it to be.